If you're still building Power Apps the same way you did a year ago, you're already behind. In 2026, there are 3 ways to build apps: planning them, writing them, and coding them, all inside Power Apps. In the next few minutes, we'll show you exactly how each one works, who they're for, and how to prepare now. Welcome back to Power Squared.
All right. So, what's the situation? The situation is that you're starting off in Power Apps and it's the beginning of 2025, and you've got 2 options in front of you. You've got Canvas apps and model driven apps. If you don't know what they are at the moment, don't worry about that. We'll go into a little bit more detail. But what we're doing here is we're setting the scene as to what's actually happened in Power Apps and how do things really look. So, as I say, the beginning of 2025, we started off with those 2 things. And then during 2025, things changed. Microsoft introduced some new things. They're catching up with the rest of the technological ecosystem, and they introduced 2 extra types of apps: code apps and vibe apps. And this time, what we're looking at is not low code, but rather no code. And let's look at the different types of apps, and we'll go into the details and figure out what are these 4 different things. And then after that, we'll actually show that it's not quite 4 things. There's another way of doing things as well. So quite interesting.
Is indeed. I think one thing to call out there is the logo change. It's really interesting as well. And really cool to see that kind of get with the times too. But let's jump into Canvas apps, shall we? What they are. And, we all know, or we should all know what a Canvas app is in 2026. It's a traditional low/no code tool that we've come to know and love for the past number of years. Being able to use Power Effects formulas, pixel perfect design, drag and drop, all good things, integrating with lots of different data sources, really flexible approach to app building without the technical pro code overhead.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation. I think also for the people who don't know what a Canvas app is at all, it's basically you get a blank canvas and you start building your app on it in a low code manner. So you're adding things by clicking and dragging and that kind of thing, but you can also write some code, which is called Power Effects, which is very similar to Excel formulas. And we've got this funny guy reacting to the Canvas app because by default, they don't look very good. And for Josh and I, we always try to make sure that Canvas app doesn't look like a Canvas app. We try to make it look really pretty. So that's one side of the Canvas, one side of the Power Apps, not the Canvas apps that we have. And then the other side at the beginning of 2025, the other choice is model-driven apps.
Yep, model-driven apps are bring your data first approach, and the interface gets built for you. You have very little flexibility on design. Everything's designed to look the same. You create your forms, you create your tables, your views for those tables, your dashboard, but everything is the same. So it's a really familiar and easy to adopt kind of way to do an app, and really quite heavily used in enterprise, particularly because this is also what Dynamics 365 uses across the board. So it's a really popular option still, but not ideal if you've got kind of bespoke requirements, right?
Yeah. And I guess we should talk a little bit about the technology behind these 2 different types of apps, because that's often been the way that it's led us to decide between one or the other. So a model-driven app is a multi-page application. So every time you visit a page in a model-driven app, it loads the entire page. And it means that that page only needs to care about itself. Whereas in a Canvas app, when you load the app, it's a single page application. So it's loading everything all in one go. So if you have 20 pages, you've got 20 pages being loaded all at once into memory, and then it will bring through the data that it needs as it displays the different screens, as they're called in a Canvas app. So when we're deciding between the 2, a lot of the time we're thinking about performance. Are we needing a huge enterprise level application? A Canvas app's not going to cut it. We have to default to a model-driven app in those cases. If we need a bespoke interface, maybe we go the Canvas app route. But if it needs to do more than just one thing, then we probably go the model-driven route, but use custom pages, which are like single-page Canvas apps embedded in pages in model-driven apps. So it's a bit of a funky situation with Power Apps, and it's something that I think it takes a while for people to understand, like, what should I truly use and what works well and what doesn't work well.
Yeah, agreed.
So those are the things that we had at the beginning of 2025. And then as we progressed through the year, we got introduced to two new concepts. And the first one that we're going to talk about is code apps. Josh and I have been using code apps quite a bit. Josh, would you like to tell us what they're about?
Sure. Code apps are a code first approach to Power Apps, right? They're really interesting because we're out of the low code kind of sphere now, and we're going full blown, programmer effectively. But what's great about code apps is, unlike a traditional kind of software development kind of tool or stack, this is directly kind of integrating into Power Apps. So all your authentication, all the data connectors, there you can use them and leverage them within your code app. And this will get displayed in the Power Apps interface effectively, but anything you build will be custom. Now that's really nice because we're kind of taking the training wheels off a little bit with this, right? And giving people a little more flexibility. But it is a little bit scary because you're going to need to know to code, or are you?
Well, I think that it's good to understand the architecture and the structure and to be able to read code. But as you imply there, you don't necessarily have to know how to code because, as you can see on the screen, it says build with agent. So you've got the ability there to use GitHub Copilot or another AI programmer to work with you to build the site out for you or to build the app out for you. And the agents nowadays, the models nowadays are remarkably good. And you can actually do a lot with very little knowledge. So this opens up a lot of doors for people. It's something that, as you say, it looks scary, but once you actually start working with it, it's really not that scary and you can achieve so much. And then the end result is that you get something that's kind of like a Canvas app in the sense that it loads like a Canvas app initially because you get the loading screen, and it is a single page application like a Canvas app. However, the performance is insanely good because it doesn't have to do all of those power effects calculations and things like that. It can just chunk through TypeScript like nobody's business, and you get supremely quick apps, and it interacts with Dataverse, SharePoint, whatever you need to interact with. It's incredibly clever.
Yeah, really, really like the premise of code apps. And then if we switch up the vibe a little bit, what's next?
Well, now we're just chilling, we're relaxing on the beach. We can make apps in our sleep. All we have to do is just chat with Vibe Apps, which is vibe.powerapps.com. And we just tell it, yeah, make this app for me, and it will generate the app for us. If only it was actually that simple, right? But that is the premise of it, and it's in its infancy. And that is the goal that Microsoft are aiming for, is just that you just talk to it in natural language and it will generate the app for you. And then let's say you wanted to tweak something somewhere, you'd be able to just click on that element and then have an inline chat and say, well, I don't want it this way, I want it another way. That's pretty cool. But yeah, as I say, it's in its infancy. The model that's being used is a very old model that doesn't work very nicely. And the context that you have, you can only type 500 characters at a time. So your prompting is very limited. It's extremely limited, so you can't expect too much from it at the moment. But we've been through code apps and we've talked about code apps and we're talking about Vibe apps now. They're both in preview. They're not things that are supposed to be mature pieces of software. But you can see with the concept that there is a really cool idea there and there's something that could be very useful. And the way I like to think about these things is like you can have the business maker, the person who understands the business process, create the initial Vibe app, and they can basically create a proof of concept. They could then hand it over to someone who can work with code apps and they can actually build it out without those limitations in place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I really love the premise of this. I feel like there's a lot of merit in these methods going forward. And in my mind, this is where we're getting pushed towards, right? This is why we wanted to make this video, because Vibe apps and code apps are the future of Power Apps. If you're still in Canvas app model driven app land, then you need to kind of start thinking about learning at the very least about these things, because they are going to be, in my mind, front and center. But with that being said, there's some limitations and some kind of nuances to this that might put some people off, isn't there, Charles?
Yeah, so we have to address the elephant in the room, don't we? Which is that, okay, we're talking about how the apps were and how the new apps are. The one thing we haven't talked about is the cost of everything. So, our beginning of 2025 options of Canvas apps and model driven apps, Canvas apps can be covered under your standards like E3 or whatever licensing. You don't need Power Apps Premium for them necessarily. So, you could use a SharePoint list with it as your backend data source, and then you don't need a premium license. Model driven apps, you do need a premium license. But with these two new kids on the block, what do we need? Oh, yeah. If we don't have premium licensing, we can't use code apps or vibe apps. So the future really is that you have to have premium, right?
Exactly. And you can see kind of Microsoft's model here and how they're pushing that premium license even more. The way I see it, though, is they're just giving us more value for money with this license, in my opinion, because they're giving us more features. They're releasing more and more things under this premium license. And now it's not just a case of, Canvas apps, model driven apps. There you go. Here's access to the premium connectors, but it's giving us new experiences to build from. But in 2025, as we roll into 2026, the number of organizations that are fully premium licensed is still quite limited in comparison. So will this be the tipping point where people start going fully into premium licensing? I don't know, but it's an interesting thing to think about.
It is. And it's not just Power Apps premium licensing that people need to consider nowadays, is it? We also
Exactly.
need to think about the fact that there's M365 Copilot that is now leaking into Power Platform. There are these bridges being created between Microsoft 365 and Power Platform. And we've suddenly got this thing called App Builder that's appearing when you have a Microsoft 365 Copilot license.
Exactly. This M365 Copilot app builder's a mouthful to say, but this feels like your kind of direct competition to, Vibe apps and Canvas apps in a way, and that these are more for that personal productivity type thing. But that's going to satisfy a lot of people, and the licensing might be more attractive than Power Platform, given that you get some nice Copilot features as well.
Yeah, again, this is in its infancy. It's a preview thing, or rather, it's a frontier thing. But the interesting thing with this is like, what are those limitations going to be? So I'm imagining that this will remain much more limited than Vibe apps. Vibe apps will be less limited, but it's going to take Microsoft time to remove those guardrails, remove those limitations, because there's always an element of risk when you do that. So this app builder is like, as we went through in a previous video on Ignite, this is our 10,000 for 10 concept. You create 1,000 apps for yourself. And then with those 1,000 apps, they're just doing simple productivity things, as you said, Josh. And there's really not much to them. And if they get destroyed, it's no problem to you. They're not going to be mission critical, business critical apps.
Exactly. Whereas Power Platform land, that's still where I'd expect full enterprise grade solutions to be built and critical stuff, but App Builder, not so much.
So, as we have been through all of these things, there's a lot of change happening, and it's probably overwhelming for the majority of people. So, I think we really need to just talk a little bit on what should they learn? How should they prepare themselves for this new future for Power Apps?
Absolutely. I think going into 2026, it's very clear that not just Microsoft, but the whole tech landscape is moving to an AI first type kind of model. So if you're not learning an element of AI, then maybe 2026 is the perfect opportunity to start learning, because more and more of these services, more and more of these technical stacks, they're all going to go to elements or integrate elements of AI or be AI first. So understanding how it all comes together and what's possible, I think is really important. When we talk into the scope of Power Apps, though, I think moving more into code apps, vibe apps is going to be really beneficial for someone's career. Yes, there's still preview, but it's important to understand and know how they work, how to get the most out of them and extract that value from from them effectively because you're going to be paying for them for a license. Would you add anything to that?
One of the things that I think people should be learning at the moment is prompting. So, AI prompting. You need to talk to AI and you're trying to get a particular result. So, how should you talk to AI? So, let's say that we're vibe coding an app. What do I need to say to that vibe coding experience in order for that to give me what I'm looking for? So, that's the kind of thing that we need to learn. And it's it's partially learning about it. So actually going and reading as to how should you really talk to these different AI models. And then it's partially experimenting because the proof really is in the pudding. You need to make something and see what happens, make mistakes as well and see what happens. Give these AI models lots of freedom and see what they decide with that freedom, and then restrict them from having any freedom and give them really clear instructions and see, can they follow those instructions? And because AI models are changing all the time, we had points in the past where you weren't able to say, do not do this, because they would always do it. But now we are reaching a point where you can actually say, do not do this, and they will pay attention to it. But every AI model will have its own context window. It will have its own amount of information that it can retain and store. So yeah, these things vary a lot. But basically, my thing to give to everyone right now is learn about prompting and practice prompting. So another thing that I'll add to that is from the non-AI side. And it's if you are going the code apps route, then I would highly recommend understanding as much as you can about architecture and the way that things work. So understanding things about how should I build out a data model? If I'm vibe coding in a code app, if I'm vibe coding, say a React app, what is React? How does it work? So you have a folder called pages. Inside the pages, you have your pages. Just understanding those different concepts. And if you're using something like Tailwind CSS for your styling, go and have a quick look at the docs and understand what's it really about. Like, what should I look out for? And any of these types of packages and things that you bring through, the vibe.paraapps experience uses Tailwind CSS, it uses React, it uses shadcn components. Shadcn components are HTML and CSS components that you can use Tailwind to style them, but they come with accessibility out of the box, for example. But when you're vibe coding your app, if you're wanting to use shadcn components, you want to notice if your vibe coding tool is not using components when it should be using them. So it's about being aware of what's really being generated from code, keeping an eye on it and reining it in where it needs to be reined in, and telling your agent, you didn't do something that I wanted you to do. Can you do this? And this is why I want you to do it. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you don't need to be a software developer for this stuff, and that's key to point out. But having an understanding of how things work at even a higher level will be really useful, and probably see you just have that kind of leg up over maybe people that just jump straight into vibe coding or that kind of side of things without really understanding what it's doing behind the scenes. It's definitely a real advantage if you at least take the time to understand what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to add one more thing. I just keep thinking of things. That's the problem. But something that I think is really important in this vibe coding era is the ability to know what's good design and what's not good design. So learning about design is very, very useful because AI will create a design that programmatically makes sense and it thinks is a good design. But in reality, it's not watching your screen at the moment and seeing what the design looks like. We need this human element. We need to be able to open up our apps, play around with them, and does it feel right? And if it doesn't, then you talk to your agent and get it to fix it. But as Josh and I are discovering, with other tools outside of the Microsoft ecosystem, they can actually open up your browser, they can take screenshots of your app, they can use your app, and they can determine whether they believe that it's working properly or not. I can only imagine that that kind of thing will come through to the Microsoft ecosystem as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, particularly in Power App land at the minute, where it feels like particularly when we're talking to create an app, using AI to create an app, it feels like we're talking to someone who's got a blindfold on effectively. The models don't see what's being developed. They just look at the code. So fingers crossed we get a bit more contextual awareness with these models from Microsoft in the future, because that's what's really going to help and let people generate really nice, accessible looking apps in the future.
Absolutely. So what should you actually use today to build? Now that we've said all of that, we've said how amazing code apps and vibe apps are and are going to be. Well, today you shouldn't be using them because they're in preview, they're not production ready. You should be using Canvas apps and model driven apps, even if you don't want to. Unless, of course, you have a long term plan for, I would say, for a code app, then it's okay to build it as a code app in the knowledge that you are going to be able to deploy it as a production app in the future. But there's currently no timescale for that. We don't know if they're going to be generally available in the first half of 2026, the last half of 2026, or even beyond that. So just proceed with some caution there. But what should people be using towards the end of the year most likely? So towards the end of the year most likely, you'd expect people to be using code apps and vibe apps. And if it's such a short time scale, then surely we should be learning about them.
It makes sense in my mind. It's you're future proofing yourself by learning about them. We can clearly see this is the direction that Microsoft are going with the platform. So get on board with that now. Learn about it. Yes, you can't use it in production. You're gonna have one foot in Canvas app, model driven apps, and another foot in code app and vibe apps. But learning, understanding all of that stuff, when you do make that switch, you're going to be well ahead of the game, in my opinion.
Definitely. And as we talked about earlier on in this video, we mentioned that there's another way of doing things that we haven't talked about here, which is that Vibe Apps actually incorporates something called Plan Designer. Code Apps doesn't, but maybe Plan Designer might generate Code Apps, Vibe Apps in the future separately from everything else. But Plan Designer is something we need to show you because that's quite impressive in and of its own right. And Plan Designer is in a funny position at the moment because it can only generate Canvas apps and model-driven apps. And there are some quirks there, as well as everything else it generates. So yeah, watch our next video on this one.
Thanks, everyone. Do remember to like, subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next one.